Hello friends, I am Manju. We will be continuing with the chapter Pastoralists in the Modern World that we did earlier also. To check the previous covered chapter, you can go to my earlier videos. Now we have come to the second part of the chapter, that is changes in pastoralist life under colonial rule. Colonial rule is the rule when the Britishers were there in our country and they made certain rules and regulations, especially for the people, that those who were residing in the forest land. These were the tribal people. So there were certain rules issued by the government to make them aware how to utilize these forest products. Now, when there is some intervention between by the government or this kind of life, that means there will be change in the life of the people that are dependent upon these forests. He says various laws were enacted to bring pastures and the pastoralists under the colonial control. They made the rules and regulations to cover the pastoralists, those who were dependent upon the animal and forest products for their livelihood. Secondly, they went wasteland. What was the rule made? Wasteland brought all cultivated land, including grazing land, forest and extra. They considered these lands as wasteland. The forest land was considered as wasteland. Why wasteland? Because it does not generate any kind of revenue. That was the major cause. So they said that the uncultivated land, including which called grazing land and on which the forest people were dependent, and the forest land, these they considered them to be the wastelands, and they wanted to convert it into agricultural land so that revenue can be generated out of it. Grazing lands were transformed to cultivable lands, from which land revenue was collected by the especially British government. They were here for the economic cause only. They were collecting this revenue of land revenue from these places where the revenue went to the British government. So they took these uncultivated land, grazing land and forest land as wastelands. That is why this Wasteland Act was enacted. Some grazing lands were given on auction. Now this was the second motive of theirs. If the person was unable to cultivate that land was auctioned. What do we mean by auction? When it is given to the highest bidder, whosoever is bidding. So this was auctioned. Selected individuals, two selected individuals that were loyal to the British people and became village headmen. Now these village people, they became headmen and their money was collected from them. So they collected the money and that was given to them. Next is Forest Act. This act was enacted. Through the Forest Act, entire forest area was classified into two categories. That means classification of the forest into two categories. It was categorized between two. One was reserved forest. Reserved forest means nobody is allowed to go inside that forest. No one was to go there. That was the covered area, reserved area. Nobody was allowed to go. Nothing was to be collected because forest people, tribes, they depended upon the forest products for mahua flowers, out of which they used to make chutney and vegetables. Then honey was collected from there. Wood was collected, firewood for burning, that was collected. Different kinds of other herbs were collected to be sold in the market so that money could be generated for them. Then where entry was completely prohibited and protected forest, where entry was allowed for observance of customary rights with strict monitoring. Strict monitoring means that they were allowed to go to the forest areas for some restricted time period. Say for example, as the sun rises, they will go inside, and before the sun sets, they were asked to come out. So this was for customary rights where their monitoring was done, and this was the area called the protected forest. Pastoralists by British forest officers. Violation of the Forest Act. If somebody violated the law, the Forest Act which was enacted by the British government, if someone violated this act, was attracting financial penalty. They had to give. Say for example, if they were taking their animals for grazing in the forest, what was there? They have to pay that tax. That was called charai. That tax was called charai. That means when the animals are going for grazing in the forest. Now this animal, if they were taking 4 animals, they have to pay for the 4 animals. If they were taking 5 animals, they have to pay for the 5 animals. And if they cheated for that, means they are taking more than the animals that they have given the number, they were put penalty, and other harassment punishments were also faced by them. Next is Criminal Tribes Act of 1871. They consider the tribal people as criminals. Now this is what is. This is called tagging someone even not knowing whether it is true or not. Prejudice, which we call. Nomadic pastoralists were subjected to suspicion by the British officers. They took them by suspicion that these people are what? They are criminals, without even knowing the truth about their being in the society, as they have no specified identity. They were not having specified identity. Identity means when you are counted number of people living in this place, that is specified identity. They were not having specified identity. Secondly, they were not permanent residents. Address of their residence. They were not permanent residents of one place. They were nomadic people, they were tribal people. They used to move from one place to another. And that was the reason why they say that they were not the ones that were permanent residents, so they were not having that. They are subjected as criminals. They were tagged as being criminals. And to regulate their movement. Regulate their movement means when they are moving from one place to another. This movement was regulated, and when their movement was regulated and activities, the Criminal Tribes Act 1871 was enacted. They enacted this act, that is the Criminal Tribes Act, under which all these tribal people were brought under the Criminal Act. A vigil at watch was kept on them by village police. They even appointed the village police that always kept a close watch on the movement of these people. Now why this? Because they were not having permanent address and residence. That was the cause. Next is grazing tax. With that, now grazing tax, I just earlier I told you in the previous slide, the colonial government imposed grazing tax on the pastoralists, which was frequently hiked. Hiked means they were chained every time. First some tax was put when they thought that people were able to give, so they made a hike of their tax also. Collection grazing tax was given on contractors to enhance the revenue. This was given on auction. Again, auction word has come. That is, it was given to the highest bidder. If someone said that I can bring you, for example, 10,000 rupees out of it, the other said I can bring you 10,500. So it means it will go to the 10,500 person. That is the highest bidder. So it was auction to and contracts to enhance the revenue. This revenue to be collected for them. Sometimes the British officers also involved in collecting this tax by issuing individual pass. An identity card or a pass was given to that person so that he could, giving him the right, he could collect that tax for the British officers to the pastoralists for the getting more income. among the pastoralist people, they were hired for collecting this tax. So instead of just putting a person other than the tribal people, they had to pay for them. So one tribal person was selected for this tax so that he could collect that tax and give it to the British officers. Impact of the colonial policies. Now, what was the impact of these colonial policies on the people, tribal people? Severe shortage of pastures. There was severe shortage of pastures. Why? They were asked to move from one place to another. This way, the pastures were finishing for them. Intensive overgrazing on the same pasture land reduced the quality of the pasture. If more and more things were grazed, that same land was used for grazing, what happened? The quality of the pastures went down. There was not frequent growth of grass in that region. Scarcity of fodder. Fodder is the food on which the animals depend upon. Led to ill health. The health of the animals went down. Diseases. Even the animal was diseased, and death of the cattle folk because of ill health, disease, and there was death of the cattle, which again affected the tribal people. Reduction in number of cattle. When that cattle is dying, definitely there will be shortage of cattle and the number of the cattle will come down. Change of cattle movement and to new areas. When they were unable to find those pastures, they moved to other areas where they were unable. Again, they have to find places so that they could make their cattle gaze upon. Adoption of selected life and engagements in other professions. Now, they were unable to graze their cattle. The number of the cattle came down. It affected their livelihood. So they have to shift to certain new jobs. They have to switch over to new settlements and engagements of profession. That is trade, for example, and even labor work by the pastoralists. So they were forced to change their jobs from pastoralists to traders, laborer workers, and pastoralists. I hope you must have got clear from this portion. And I wish that it will be a good description of the portion which I have done it today. Please subscribe my channel for your further videos. Thank you. Have a nice day.